Welcome to the Joanne Avison podcast. When we talk about fascia and emotion, there's a phrase that comes up again and again. You'll have heard it. The issue is in the tissue, or fascia stores trauma, or the body holds emotional memory. And while there's something intuitively true in those ideas, they can also be misleading if we take them too literally, or if we take standardized or reductionist definitions of fascia as the foundation. So in this episode, I want to slow that conversation right down. Not to dismiss it, not to explain it away, and not to make it wrong, but to bring a little more clarity and nuance and care to what we actually mean when we talk about emotion living in the body. And this is the first episode in a short series exploring fascia and inner experience from a few different angles. Each episode stands on its own, but together they'll build a bigger picture. And today is about how experience leaves an imprint and what fascia has to do with that. Not as a storage unit, not as a filing cabinet for trauma, but as a living, responsive tissue that is shaped by how we meet the world over time and how our experience can in fact shape us. Let's start with a simple reframe. Instead of asking, does fascia store emotional memory? A more useful question might be, how does lived experience shape the way the body responds and organizes itself? Because fascia isn't static. It's not inert. It's not something that passively holds things in place. It's responsive. It adapts. It changes tone, hydration, elasticity, organization, and texture in response to how we move, how we breathe, how we orient, and how we perceive. And that is movement by movement, moment by moment, because moving is the hallmark of being alive. So when people talk about emotions being stored in fascia, what they're often pointing to is not necessarily a state induced by a memory in the psychological sense, but a pattern reflecting our story, a way of holding, a way of bracing or yielding, a familiar relationship to gravity, to effort, to safety. And those patterns don't appear overnight. They emerge gradually, often through repetition. And they can become a familiar pattern that in turn becomes a default. Most of us don't need research to recognize this. Think about how your body responds when you're under pressure, or if you feel rushed, or when something feels uncertain. The shoulders can subtly lift, the jaw can tighten, the breath can become shallower. The abdomen can firm. I call it a scrunch. None of that is necessarily pathological. It's adaptive. Your system is responding to how it perceives the situation. Now, imagine those responses happening again and again and again, day after day, year after year. And what begins as a momentary response can slowly become a baseline, a default. Not necessarily because the body's holding on to a fault or something emotionally unresolved, but because the body has learned a particular way of organizing itself in relation to a kind of experience. And this is where fascia becomes relevant, because fascia is deeply involved in how force is distributed, how movement is coordinated, and how the body maintains continuity in response to experience. It reflects how we live, how we adapt, not just what we remember. This is an important distinction. Fascia doesn't necessarily store emotions like a hard drive stores data. It reflects patterns of use, perception, and response. It isn't wired like a computer, which is actually a common metaphor for the nervous system. Rather, it resonates like a field around the way it organizes itself in response. Tone increases where protection feels necessary, or yielding is reduced where unpredictability is expected, or elasticity changes where movement becomes habitual or constrained. So this may not be good or bad, right or wrong, worst or best performance. It's more about finding what is appropriate at the time. Over time, these patterns can feel and become emotional responses. They can be accompanied by sensation, memory, even feeling states, but that doesn't mean fascia's holding trauma in the way we often imagine or we hear described. It can mean the fascia is expressing how the system has adapted, and adaptation is essentially intelligent. It's not a mistake. And this moves us out of the realm of right and wrong, the duality of a good response or a bad response, and into the domain of easing from dissonance towards resonance, as something of a choice in how we continue to adapt once we recognize it. Now, I've seen this many times in practice. Someone comes in and they're describing a sense of tightness or restriction that feels emotionally charged. They might say something like, "This feels old," or "Oh, this feels familiar," or "This reminds me of a time when." And as awareness is brought to the area, nothing dramatic happens necessarily. There's no big emotional release, no catharsis. Instead, what changes is relationship. The person notices how they habitually brace, or how they subtly hold their breath, how they anticipate before they move. And that noticing deepens the tissue response. Not because something has been released, but because the system no longer needs to maintain the same pattern. What shifts first is awareness. The tissue follows. And that person may sense or feel a memory arise. And in my experience, it may be accompanied by wonder or awe. There may be laughter or tears of recognition, or a note of complete surprise as they recall something and then something else. And that order matters. And I want to be very clear here. This is not about treating trauma. It's not about resolving psychological history through the body. Those are complex processes that require appropriate support. What we're talking about here is how awareness changes our organization. When perception changes, the body reorganizes itself differently, quite naturally. When attention softens, tone can often follow. And by contrast, when attention is peaked, tone can respond accordingly, and we wake up to a new observation or realization. It doesn't have to be big. And it doesn't have to be dramatic. This is not healing something from the past. It's subtly changing how the present moment is met. It can moderate the need to defend quite naturally. If you'd like, you might try something very simple right now with me here. There's nothing to fix, nothing to release. Just notice how you're sitting or standing. Notice where your body's making more effort than it needs to. Notice where you might be holding without realizing. Notice something about your feet or your knees or how you're sitting. Or perhaps where your shoulder blades are on your back, or how open your hands are, or where your breath feels most. And instead of changing anything, just stay curious. What happens when you simply bring attention there without intention, without even knowing why? Just try it out because we can be curious together. I mean, often something subtle shifts on its own. A breath might deepen, or a sense of space appears. A speed of something slows down, whatever that is for you. That's not fascia releasing emotion. That's actually the entire body architecture, which is made of your fascia, responding to your awareness. And it may feel like a subtle expansion or an easing as you bring yourself, your focus, and your breath into presence with ease, with grace. So when we talk about fascia and emotional experience, it can be helpful to move away from dramatic narratives. Fascia doesn't trap the past. It reflects how we've learned to meet life through living. And that's good news because it means change doesn't require excavation. It requires presence. And as awareness becomes more refined, organisation becomes more adaptable. And bear in mind, you've adapted this far, survived through all that adaptation. And then we can ask, what's the next step? So in this episode, we've stayed with how experience shapes the body over time. But in the next episode, we'll explore something that naturally follows from this, which is how we sense from the inside, how the body communicates before thought, how perception itself becomes a form of guidance, especially if we don't make our response wrong. Rather, we take it forward as a question rather than a cause of a problem. So if this series speaks to you, make sure you subscribe because that helps you stay with the unfolding conversation. And I'll really look forward to seeing you in the next episode. God bless.